How unequal is the world? There is a single number economists use to answer that, the Gini index. It runs from 0, where everybody earns exactly the same, to 100, where one person earns everything. Nobody is at either extreme. So real countries live between about 24 and 63, and the global average across the 144 countries with data is around 36. In this video, we go through the 6 most unequal countries on Earth and the 6 most equal, and for each you get the Gini score, the population, the income per person, and the region. You will find that the most unequal countries cluster in 2 places for 2 completely different historical reasons, that the most equal countries are not the ones you expect, and that one very large country cut its inequality dramatically, which proves this is a policy choice rather than destiny. We will also cover the 2 traps that make people misread these numbers entirely. Let's start at the top. The most unequal country in the world is South Africa, and it is not a close contest. Its Gini index is 63. To put that in perspective, the global average across the 144 countries with data is about 36, and South Africa sits roughly 3.5 standard deviations above it. Statistically, it is an outlier, not just a leader. Quick explanation of the scale. Gini runs from 0, where everyone earns exactly the same, to 100, where one person earns everything. Nobody is at either end. So real countries live between about 24 and 63, and South Africa defines the top. The cause is specific and historical. Apartheid deliberately engineered separate economies by race, and 30 years after it ended, the ownership of land, companies, and capital has shifted far more slowly than political rights did. Unemployment above 30% keeps the gap locked in. Second on Earth is Namibia, with a Gini index of 59.1, and the explanation rhymes with South Africa's because the history does. Namibia was governed by South Africa for 75 years and had apartheid law applied to it directly, only gaining independence in 1990. The economic structure that created is still visible in the data. Namibia is not a poor country by African standards. It is classified as upper middle income. It has diamonds, uranium, of which it is one of the world's largest producers, and rich Atlantic fisheries. But the wealth from those resources is concentrated in a small commercial sector and a small share of the population, while a large rural majority lives on subsistence farming. That combination, real national wealth alongside extreme concentration, is what produces a Gini near 60. Average income tells you almost nothing about how people live. Botswana is genuinely one of the great development successes of the last 60 years. At independence in 1966, it was among the poorest countries on the planet, with almost no paved roads. Then it found diamonds, and unlike almost everyone else, it managed them well, negotiating a strong deal with De Beers, investing the revenue, keeping a stable democracy, and avoiding the resource curse that wrecked so many neighbors. It became an upper-middle-income country within a generation. And yet its Gini index is 54.9, among the highest on Earth. Why? Because diamond mining generates enormous revenue with very few jobs. It is capital-intensive, not labor-intensive. So the wealth flows to the state and a small skilled workforce, while much of the population remains in low-productivity work. Growth and equality are not the same achievement. Eswatini, the small landlocked kingdom formerly known as Swaziland, has a Gini index of 54.6, placing it among the 6 most unequal countries on Earth. With a population of only around 1.2 million, it is one of the smallest countries on this list, which shows that inequality has nothing to do with size. Eswatini is Africa's last absolute monarchy, and a significant share of national land and economic assets is held in trust by the crown rather than owned privately, which concentrates control tightly. Its economy depends heavily on a single neighbor, South Africa, for trade, and its currency is pegged to the South African rand, so it imports its neighbors' monetary conditions along with its economic structure. Sugar and forestry dominate exports. A small, dependent economy with concentrated ownership is close to a recipe for a wide income gap. Now leave Africa, because the most unequal region in the world as a whole is Latin America, and Colombia leads it with a Gini index of 53.9, down slightly from 54.8 the year before. Why is this entire region so unequal? 3 reasons that compound. First, land. Colonial-era estates concentrated ownership in very few hands, and land reform mostly never happened, so that concentration was inherited. Second, informality. A very large share of Latin American workers have no formal contract, which means no minimum wage protection, no pension contributions, and no bargaining power. Third, tax systems that lean heavily on consumption taxes, which everyone pays at the same rate, rather than on income and wealth, so they redistribute far less than European systems do. Colombia also absorbed millions of migrants from Venezuela's collapse, which strained the bottom of the labor market. Brazil has a Gini index of 51.6, which is very high. But here is the encouraging part, and it is the most important fact in this series. In the early 2000s, Brazil's Gini was around 58. It has fallen by roughly 6 points in about 20 years. That may sound modest, but Gini moves extremely slowly, and a fall of that size in a country of 213 million people is one of the largest sustained reductions in inequality ever recorded anywhere. How? Mainly 2 things. Large conditional cash transfer programs that paid poor families directly, on condition their children attended school and received vaccinations, which both raised incomes now and built human capital for later, and sustained real increases in the minimum wage, which lifted the bottom of the distribution. Inequality is not a fixed feature of a country. It is a policy outcome. Now flip to the other end. The most equal country in the world by income is Slovakia, with a Gini index of just 23.8. Not Sweden, not Norway, Slovakia. And the top of this list is dominated not by the Nordics, but by Central and Eastern Europe. Why? 2 forces combine. First, the inheritance of the socialist period, which deliberately compressed wage structures so that the gap between the highest and lowest paid was small, and that compression partly survived the transition to a market economy. Second, current policy, including universal healthcare, free education through university, and a substantial welfare state. Slovakia is not a rich country by Western European standards, and that is the honest caveat. Its equality is real, but it is equality at a more modest level of income. Being equal and being wealthy are separate questions. Belarus records a Gini index of 24.4, making it one of the most equal countries on earth by income. And this is the case that shows most clearly why equality alone is not the same as a good economy. Belarus retained far more state control than its neighbors after the Soviet Union dissolved. A very large share of employment is still in state-owned enterprises. Wages are heavily administered rather than market-determined, and there is little of the private wealth accumulation that widens the gap elsewhere. So the distribution is genuinely flat. But average incomes are far below those of nearby European Union members. Growth has been weak, and many of the most capable workers have emigrated. Belarus is a reminder that you can equalize a distribution by lifting the bottom or by holding down the top, and only one of those makes a country better off. Slovenia has a Gini index of 24.7, among the very lowest on earth, and unlike some of its neighbors, it achieved that while becoming genuinely prosperous. It has the highest income per person of any former Yugoslav republic, is a full member of the European Union and the Eurozone, and is classified as a high-income economy. How does it manage both? Unusually strong collective bargaining, so wages are negotiated across whole sectors rather than firm by firm, which compresses the range. High union coverage, a progressive tax system with substantial transfers, and near-universal access to education and healthcare. Slovenia is the answer to anyone who claims equality must come at the cost of prosperity, because it manages a Gini in the mid-20s alongside Western European living standards. Small, organized, and consistent beats large and chaotic. Czechia has a Gini index of 25.7, and alongside that it consistently records one of the lowest poverty rates in the entire European Union, which is the combination that actually matters. Low inequality with widespread poverty would be equality of hardship. Czechia has neither. Its economy is heavily industrial, with the automotive sector alone worth around 10% of national output, the highest dependence in Europe. Those manufacturing jobs are relatively well paid, stable, and unionized, and they employ a large share of the workforce in the middle of the income distribution, which is precisely what keeps a Gini low. Add universal healthcare, free education, and low unemployment. The vulnerability is the concentration, because an economy leaning that heavily on car manufacturing is exposed if the electric transition reduces how many workers assembly requires. Here is the result that surprises people most. The Nordic countries have the strongest global reputation for equality, and they are genuinely among the most equal societies on Earth. But they are not at the top of the table. Norway records a Gini of about 26.5, and Denmark around 29.9, both clearly higher than Slovakia at 23.8, Belarus at 24.4, or Slovenia at 24.7. Why? Because the Nordics are wealthy, open, market economies with large financial sectors, successful entrepreneurs, and substantial capital income at the top, which stretches the distribution upward. Their equality comes from redistribution after the market, through taxes and transfers, rather than from compressing market incomes in the first place. And there is a further wrinkle worth knowing. Because measured by wealth rather than income, the Nordics are far less equal than their reputation suggests. So here's the whole spread. At the top, South Africa at 63, then Namibia at 59, Botswana at 55, Eswatini at 55, Colombia at 54, and Brazil at 52. At the bottom, Slovakia at 24, Belarus, Slovenia, Czechia, Norway, and Denmark. The global average sits at about 36. Two warnings before you use these numbers. First, Gini measures income, not wealth, and wealth is always far more unequal everywhere, including in the countries at the equal end. Second, watch what is being counted. India often appears near the top of most equal lists, but that figure is based on consumption rather than income, and consumption always looks more equal because richer people save instead of spending. Measured on income, India is nowhere near the equal end. And the encouraging note, Brazil proved this can be changed. So which surprised you most? Comment below. Let's put the whole spread together. The most unequal countries on Earth are South Africa at 63, Namibia at 59.1, Botswana at 54.9, Eswatini at 54.6, Colombia at 53.9, and Brazil at 51.6. Notice they cluster in two regions for two different reasons. In Southern Africa, the driver is the economic architecture left by apartheid and colonial rule, plus resource industries that generate revenue without generating jobs. In Latin America, it is colonial land concentration, a very large and formal workforce with no contracts or bargaining power, and tax systems that lean on consumption rather than income. At the other end sits Slovakia at 23.8, Belarus at 24.4, Slovenia at 24.7, Czechia at 25.7, Norway at 26.5, and Denmark at 29.9. Central and Eastern Europe leads, partly through inherited wage compression and partly through current welfare policy, while the Nordics achieve their equality through redistribution after the market rather than before it. So what should you actually take from this? 3 things. First, inequality is not destiny. Brazil cut its Gini from around 58 to 51.6 in roughly 2 decades through cash transfers tied to school attendance and sustained real rises in the minimum wage. Gini moves very slowly, so a shift that size in a country of 213 million people is among the largest ever recorded. It was a policy choice, and it worked. Second, equality on its own is not a goal. Belarus is one of the most equal countries on Earth, and also one of the poorer and slower-growing ones in its region, because you can flatten a distribution by lifting the bottom or by holding down the top, and only one of those makes people better off. Slovenia shows you can have both. Third, be careful what you are measuring. Gini captures income, not wealth, and wealth is dramatically more unequal everywhere, including in the countries at the equal end of this list. And a consumption-based Gini, like India's, will always look more equal than an income-based one, which is why India appears near the top of lists it does not really belong on. So tell me, which of these surprised you most? Write it in the comments. I read every one. If this helped, share it with someone who argues about inequality. and subscribe for more economics made simple. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. See you in the next video.